I love my husband. I love my husband.
Misunderstanding becomes revelation when you finally hear the words that someone has been living all along. Jae-sung Park was 45, had built himself from nothing into one of Singapore's most powerful organized crime figures. He controlled import-export operations that moved billions annually. He had politicians, police commissioners, and business leaders on his payroll. He had achieved the kind of wealth and power that most people spent their lives dreaming about. And he believed, with absolute certainty, that his wife did not love him. Kira was 38, had been born into Singapore's wealthiest family. Her father owned shipping companies that generated generational wealth. Her family name opened doors that money alone could not open. She was educated, sophisticated, moved through elite society with the ease of someone who had never questioned that she belonged in the highest circles. They had married 3 years earlier. It was a merger disguised as a marriage. Jae-sung had wanted legitimacy, the kind that comes from being married to a woman from old money, from being integrated into established society, rather than merely tolerated as successful criminal entrepreneur. Kira's family had wanted to diversify their investments, and Jae-sung's criminal enterprise was, in its own way, diversification. Neither had pretended the marriage was based on love. They had negotiated the arrangement the way business partners negotiate deals, with clarity about what each side needed and what each side was willing to offer. Jae-sung brought wealth and power. Kira brought legitimacy and social integration. Both benefited. Neither expected emotional connection. For 3 years, they had maintained the fiction that this arrangement was sufficient. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted for Jae-sung. He had fallen in love with his wife. It had happened gradually. Noticing the way she moved through their home, the way she made decisions about their shared spaces that reflected thoughtfulness rather than selfishness, the way she spoke about charitable causes with genuine passion rather than performative concern. She had built a life of meaning in the time they had spent together, and he had found himself drawn to that meaning, wanting to be part of it, wanting her to see him not as the criminal who had married into legitimacy, but as someone worth loving. But Kira had shown no signs of reciprocating. She was kind to him. She was attentive to his needs. She managed their household with elegant efficiency. But she did not show the kind of love that Jae-sung found himself increasingly wanting from her. She did not look at him the way he caught himself looking at her. She did not seek out his company beyond the social obligations their marriage required. She did not give him any indication that she had feelings for him beyond friendly respect. So Jae-sung had concluded that she had married him for the same reason he had thought he married her, for transaction, for benefit, for the practical advantages of their union. That any love she felt was the quiet love between partners who had become companions through proximity, not the passionate love that Jae-sung had found himself increasingly wanting. He had accepted this with the resignation of a man who had built his life on accepting difficult realities and moving forward. But he had never quite moved past the quiet ache of knowing that the woman he loved did not love him back. The gala was held at the Meridian Grand Hotel in Singapore's central business district. It was a charity event, Kira's project, a foundation focused on supporting women in developing countries, on providing education and economic opportunities to communities that typically had neither. Jae-sung had attended similar events with Kira dozens of times. He understood his role, to be present, to smile appropriately, to make the kind of small talk that wealthy people make at wealthy gatherings. He wore the tuxedo and the polished exterior that his wife required, and he functioned adequately in the role of devoted husband to a woman he loved but who did not love him back. This event would be different only in that Kira would be delivering the keynote speech, something she had mentioned weeks earlier, but that Jae-sung had not paid particular attention to. She gave speeches regularly, and they were always intelligent and thoughtful and performed with the polish of someone comfortable speaking in front of crowds. He stood with a drink at the back of the ballroom, watching the crowd, wealthy Singaporeans, international business leaders, celebrities and politicians, and people whose primary value was their ability to donate money to causes. The atmosphere was exactly what he expected. Elegant, carefully curated, performing charity while actually celebrating wealth. When Kira took the podium, she was exactly what he expected as well. beautiful in her emerald green gown, composed, articulate as she discussed the foundation's work, the lives being changed, the economic impact of their initiatives. But then she paused, and something shifted in her expression. I wanted to start this speech with talking about statistics and outcomes, and the impact of our work. But I realized that would be dishonest about what this foundation actually means to me. She looked out at the crowd, and her voice began to shake slightly. When I married Jae-sung 3 years ago, I thought I understood what marriage was. I thought it was an arrangement between two people with compatible interests. I thought it was partnership in the most literal sense, strategic alignment of assets and goals. Jae-sung felt his entire body go rigid. I had been married before for 5 years, to a man my family approved of. We were matched in every practical way, same social background, same level of education, same understanding of what we were supposed to be doing with our lives. And I was miserable, because I realized that compatibility is not the same as connection. That having everything in common does not mean having anything that actually matters. She paused, and Jae-sung watched as tears began to slide down her face. When I agreed to marry Jae-sung, I made a calculation. I decided that I would be married to someone I did not love but who would be beneficial for my family's business interests. I decided that emotion was a luxury I could not afford. That I would be a good partner in every practical way, but that love would be something I kept separate, something I maintained in my private interior life, where it could not be weaponized or used against me. The room had gone very quiet. But 3 years of living with someone changes you. 3 years of seeing how someone conducts themselves when they think no one is watching. 3 years of watching someone choose kindness when cruelty would be easier, choose integrity when compromise would be more profitable. 3 years of realizing that love is not something you decide to feel or not feel. It's something that grows in the spaces between the moments you think are important. She looked directly at Jae-sung, though she did not explicitly acknowledge him. I fell in love with my husband not because he is powerful or wealthy or successful, though he is all of those things. I fell in love with him because he is the kind of man who could have used his power to hurt people, but instead he has increasingly used it to protect them. Because he could have remained the person he was when I married him, focused only on his own empire. But instead he has grown into someone who thinks about impact and consequence and who he wants to be. Jae-sung felt something break open inside his chest. I realized last year that I had made a terrible mistake. I realized that I had married someone I was beginning to love, and I had never told him. I had kept that love private and protected because I had decided it was safer than vulnerability. But keeping that love private meant that the person I loved had no idea that I felt that way. It meant that he lived every day believing that I had married him for transaction when actually I had come to love him for himself. She took a breath, and her voice steadied slightly. So, I am using this public platform to say something I should have said in private, but maybe saying it here, in front of people who know us both, will force me to be honest in a way I have struggled to be honest privately. I love my husband. I am in love with my husband. Not because of what he can provide, but because of who he is becoming. And I am sorry that it took me 3 years to say those words, and I am sorry that I am saying them publicly rather than privately, but I am grateful that I am finally saying them at all. She stepped back from the podium, and the room erupted in applause. But Jae-sung did not move. He stood at the back of the ballroom, his hand still holding his drink, and he understood that he had been completely wrong about everything. He had spent 3 years believing that Kira did not love him because she had not performed love in the ways he expected love to be performed. But love, he was understanding in this moment, was not always performance. Sometimes it was quiet presence. Sometimes it was the small choices you made when no one was watching. Sometimes it was the willingness to build a life with someone you had thought you would never love, and discovering that the building itself created the love you had thought was impossible. He had misunderstood her completely. When the formal portion of the gala ended, he found her in a private room where the speakers were greeting well-wishers. "What were you thinking?" he asked her, his voice low, only for her. "I was thinking that I had been a coward for 3 years. That I had told myself I was protecting myself by not being vulnerable, when actually I was protecting nothing. That I was hurting both of us by maintaining a fiction that our marriage was merely transactional when it stopped being transactional for me almost 2 years ago. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was terrified. Because I had convinced myself that if I told you, you would realize you had married into a situation you did not want, that you would leave, that my vulnerability would be used against me the way it had been used against me in my first marriage. I love you, Jae-sung said. I have loved you for longer than you realize. And I thought you did not love me because you did not perform love in the ways I expected. But I was completely wrong. You are not wrong. I was not showing love because I was not allowing myself to feel love. But I was showing love in other ways, in the choices I made about how I spent my time, in the causes I supported, in the way I built our home, in the way I tried to be someone worthy of the person you have become. I just was not brave enough to name that love until tonight. Over the following weeks, their relationship transformed. Not dramatically. They did not suddenly become the kind of couple who demonstrated affection constantly or who made grand romantic gestures. They were still fundamentally the people they had been, somewhat reserved, emotionally controlled, products of cultures that did not celebrate public displays of emotion. But something shifted in the foundation of their relationship. Kira began to tell him directly that she loved him. Jae-sung began to accept that love in ways he had not allowed himself to accept it before. They talked about what it meant that they had built love not through passionate intensity but through quiet presence, through showing up for each other in small ways over 3 years, through choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. I think this is what real love is, Kira said to him one evening, weeks after the speech. Not the overwhelming emotion that consumes you in the beginning of relationships, but the choice to keep showing up, to keep being present, to keep building something together even when it would be easier to keep yourself protected. I thought love was supposed to be immediate, that you either loved someone or you did not. That is one kind of love. But I think the love that lasts is the love that grows slowly, that builds through small moments of trust and vulnerability accumulated over time. The love that happens because you choose to stay with someone long enough to actually know them, not just the version of them they present to the world. 2 years after the gala speech, Kira became pregnant. It was planned, intentional, a choice they made together as a couple who had finally moved past the fiction that their marriage was merely transactional. Their daughter was born in Singapore, in the hospital that Kira had helped fund through her foundation work. The child had her mother's skin and her father's eyes, and she represented something that neither Jae-sung nor Kira had expected when they married. Genuine love, genuine family, genuine hope for a future that extended beyond themselves. When their daughter was a month old, Jae-sung made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He began the process of stepping back from his criminal enterprise. Not immediately. The transition would take years, would require careful management of his organization, would require ensuring that his departure did not destabilize the structure he had built. But he started the process of reducing his direct involvement, of training successors, of creating a situation where he could eventually leave the criminal world entirely. "Why are you doing this?" his organization's second-in-command asked him. "Because I realized that the person I want to be is not compatible with the life I have built. Kira saw something in me 3 years ago, potential to be better than I was. I spent 3 years thinking that she was mistaking me for someone else. But I realized that she was not mistaken. She was seeing who I could become if I made the choice to become it. You are throwing away power that took you decades to build. I am not throwing it away. I am choosing something else. I am choosing to be present for my wife and my daughter in ways that I cannot be if I am managing criminal enterprise. I am choosing to become the man that my wife fell in love with, not the man I was when she married me." 5 years after the gala speech, Jae-sung had completely transitioned out of his criminal organization. He had sold his interests to trusted lieutenants, had ensured that his departure created minimal disruption to operations, had severed his direct involvement with activities that required illegal operations. He had built legitimate businesses, investments in Kira's foundation work, support for nonprofits that aligned with their shared values, participation in charitable organizations that actually addressed the causes they claimed to support. It was not a perfect transition. There were moments when the power and the status and the resources of his criminal empire seemed more valuable than the quieter satisfaction of legitimate work. There were moments when he questioned whether he was actually capable of being the person Kira believed he could be. But every time he felt those doubts, he would remember the moment she had stood at that podium and told a room full of wealthy Singaporeans that she loved him, that she had loved him long enough to base her life around that love, that she was willing to be vulnerable in public because she could no longer afford to be protected in private. And he would understand that the greatest power he had ever exercised was not the power to intimidate or control, but the power to choose differently, to become someone different, to allow someone else's love for him to motivate genuine transformation. 10 years after the gala speech, Jae-sung was invited to speak at a conference about rehabilitation and career transitions. He was asked to discuss how someone with his background had managed to extract himself from organized crime and build a legitimate life. I had to recognize that the person I was and the person I wanted to become were incompatible. I had to accept that transformation requires vulnerability. And I had to believe that someone who loved me had seen who I could be before I could see it myself. He paused, looking out at the audience. The speech my wife gave at that gala was not a romantic gesture designed to impress me. It was a moment of radical honesty about what she had been feeling for years. It created accountability that I could not have created for myself. It forced me to understand that the life I had been living was not sustainable, not just for my criminal enterprise, but for my soul. She gave me permission to become someone different by showing me that she had already made space in her heart for that different person. "Do you regret the years you spent in organized crime?" someone from the audience asked. "I regret the people I hurt. I regret the choices I made that facilitated harm to others. I regret the version of myself that justified those actions. But I do not regret the journey that led me to understand what I was doing, to recognize that I was capable of being better, and to have the partner who believed in my capacity for transformation even when I did not believe in it myself." Kira listened to him speak from the audience, their daughter beside her, now a teenager who knew the outline of her father's history and who had grown up watching him transform from criminal to legitimate businessman to devoted father and husband. After his speech, someone approached him and said, "Your wife's speech changed your life." "My wife's speech did not change my life. It was honest about what was already true. What changed my life was my choice to listen to that honesty and to act on it." The speech was just the moment when I could no longer pretend that I did not understand what she was offering. That night, Jae-sung and Kira sat together in the home they had built together over 15 years of marriage. "Do you regret marrying me?" she asked him, not for the first time but with genuine openness. "I regret every moment I spent believing that you did not love me when you were showing me your love in every action, every choice, every way you decided to build a life with me. But I do not regret marrying you. You saw who I could become before I could see it myself. You loved me into becoming better. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." She took his hand, and they sat in comfortable silence. The silence of two people who had spent 15 years building love not through grand gestures, but through small choices, through showing up for each other every day, through deciding that vulnerability was worth the risk of hurt, through understanding that the love that lasts is not the love that consumes you in a moment, but the love that sustains you across years. He had thought she did not love him. He had been completely wrong. And that wrongness, he understood now, had been a gift. It had forced him to pay attention, to notice the ways that love was being demonstrated to him, to eventually understand that he had the capacity to become the man that his wife saw when she looked at him.